Tsutomu Yamaguchi could probably claim to be the unluckiest and luckiest person of his era. This is the astonishing story of the man who survived not one but 2 atomic bombs. Yamaguchi was a naval engineer working for Mitsubishi Industries who had travelled to Hiroshima on business. At 8:15 a.m. on August 6, 1945, the young Japanese man suddenly heard a loud explosion like a thunderclap. Looking up, he observed a bomber and 2 small parachutes, objects he had never seen before. With a massive flash in the sky, he was violently thrown to the ground, while around him everything darkened with ferocious burning and collapsing walls. Buildings were shaking while windows shattered and structures incinerated in a gigantic cloud of smoke. Yamaguchi passed out as the air filled with thick, suffocating dust which saturated the atmosphere. American forces had just dropped a nuclear bomb on Hiroshima, its horrific impact followed by an eerie silence. Yamaguchi was unable to see or hear anything and had no sense of where he was. After hours of lying there in the dark, he eventually managed to get up, experiencing uncontrollable shaking and ringing ears. Feeling stunned that he was still alive, he had no idea how long he had lain in the rubble. He staggered out in great pain, lifting debris and trying to rescue the injured and lifeless bodies of others. Miraculously, his only injuries were perforated eardrums, temporary blinding, and radiation burns to his torso. He found an emergency shelter, but the next day fled the apocalyptic scene to his home 300 kilometers southwest of the devastated city of Hiroshima. His home was in Nagasaki. The traumatized and scarred man began to regain his sense of normality when he returned to his family, whom he told of the horror he had experienced and survived. Although heavily bandaged and still with trembling hands, he went back to work 2 days later to resume his duties of drafting and signing engineering contracts. On that first day back, August 9th, he found himself being criticised by his supervisor and described as crazy after relating how a single bomb had destroyed the city of Hiroshima. At that very moment, 11 a.m., a second atomic bomb was dropped, this time in his very hometown of Nagasaki. Again, the city shook terrifyingly in the lethal blast, which again incinerated homes and scattered injured victims, followed by that deathly silence. Yamaguchi again passed out and yet again miraculously survived. However, because of damage to his bandages, he suffered from high fever and was vomiting for the next week. Yamaguchi's wife also survived but suffered radiation poisoning. Yamaguchi continued to relive the trauma of the explosion on a nightly basis in the form of terrifying nightmares. The couple went on to get their lives back together, having 3 children, and with Yamaguchi later returning to his work with Mitsubishi designing oil tankers. As he grew older, he became a vocal proponent of nuclear disarmament, speaking of the agony and debasement of human dignity created by the atomic bomb. Writing an autobiography and book of poems, for a long time Yamaguchi did not feel the need to draw attention to his double survivor status. However, it was in later life that he began to regard his survival as destiny, and so in January 2009 he applied for double recognition. His application was accepted by the Japanese government in March 2009, making him the only person officially recognized to be a survivor of both bombings. Yamaguchi saw his double recognition status as important, as his double radiation exposure had now become an official government record. He hoped this would enlighten the younger generation as to the horrifying history of the atomic bombings, even when he is gone. Despite going on to live relatively healthy lives, his and his wife's exposure to radiation took its toll in later years. Yamaguchi's daughter remembers him being constantly swathed in bandages until she reached the age of 12. In his later life, he began to suffer from radiation-related ailments, which included cataracts and acute leukemia. His wife also sustained radiation poisoning from the nuclear fallout called Black Rain after the Nagasaki explosion, and passed in 2008 at the age of 88 due to kidney and liver cancer. All three of the couple's children reported suffering from health problems which they blamed on their parents' exposures. Yamaguchi himself learned in 2009 that he was suffering from terminal stomach cancer. He passed on January 4, 2010 in Nagasaki at the age of 93. Anyone to survive one nuclear attack is extremely lucky, and this man had survived two and lived for more than another 60 years. However, his message was always clear that nuclear weapons are a dangerous existential threat to humankind. His daughter, Toshiko Yamasaki, was also very vocal in condemning a trivialization of his experience to the world. In the same year she lost her father, he was named the unluckiest man in the world by the BBC comedy panel programme QI, and his story made a butt of dark humour. On the Japanese news network NHK, Toshiko expressed her sadness that the horrors of the atomic bomb were being laughed at in Britain, which has its own nuclear arms. She was concerned that the horrendous weapon is still not well enough understood in the world. The Japanese embassy in London also protested to the BBC, who responded by expressing regret and deleting the file. Although difficult to calculate, the two bombings probably killed up to 200,000 people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, most of them civilians. Many more succumbed to injuries and illness in the following months and years. The effects of the bombings can be seen in both cities to this day.